So here we are in Roman Britain. The Romans have come, they've invaded, and they have brought along their military presence and have taken over most of Britain and decided that most of the people that live there are not worthy of their time and effort, so they have rebuilt everything, well, made new towns and made them bigger and more like modern towns in their own unique style. So the Romans brought along with them near enough everything from schools to baths and temples, religion, more trade. The roads that you see around Britain, if they're extremely straight, then it was probably originally a Roman road, because that's how they moved their military through the country. And we obviously have reminiscences of Romans stuff like Hadrian's Wall and all the forts that are along there to keep out the Scottish, because they did not like those at all. So the population of Britain has increased to 2.8 million to 3 million people, with London being their main focus of trade, because it was a big port. So London had a population of about 60,000 people, and it wasn't just Britons and Romans that lived there. There were like lots of different Europeans and Middle Easterns and North African people there as well. And the Romans actually introduced a lot of new different species of plants and animals as well as they brought them along. So the houses that, like the one that we are working on now, most people actually, if they lived in one of the bigger cities, they would have actually lived in small sort of flats and stuff, like how most people live these days, and would have to go out to taverns and places to get hot food, because they wouldn't have kitchens. They would basically have a bedroom and that's about it. And the richer families, like the one here, would live in a house called domes. I think that's how you say it. And they would obviously have servants and slaves to have their own cooking and stuff as well. So they were mainly decorated in the interior with frescoes and stuccos. So they would have had really elaborately painted like wall paintings, and there'd been like reds and greens and yellows, and which we can't really do in The Sims, but I kind of made up for that for putting loads of pots everywhere. And the main features of these houses were walled gardens, fountains, outdoor eating areas was like a key thing, lots of chaise longues, lots of fruit, and the houses would sometimes have balconies as well, especially if they're in the cities, so they could actually have some outdoor space. The Romans introduced a new different way of architecture and urban planning and sort of industrial processes as well, because they were extremely efficient. The main sort of places that there were was obviously London, St Albans, Chester, Bath, Fishbourne, which was one of their main ports, Canterbury, Colchester, Winchester and Gloucester, but mostly any major sort of landmark town in Britain kind of had some sort of Roman influence. So their architecture, which we'll see a bit more as we get into some bigger builds, they kind of based their style off the ancient Greek way of building. So lots of known as classical architecture. So there's lots of like buttresses and archways, aqueducts, amphitheatres, sort of really big grand things. They also introduced granaries and residential housing blocks, so they were very forward thinking in what they did. They obviously used a lot of columns in their builds, and they were used from like domestic architecture from houses and stuff all the way through to their massive sort of builds. And columns were sort of used as sometimes they started off using them for actual support of the buildings, but then over time, as they became better builders and there were new materials that they could use, they actually used it more for aesthetic reasons, and that's how there were columns near enough everywhere in Roman builds. So the materials that they used in the builds were, most of it was marble, so they obviously had that in Italy and shipped it over, and one of the first places that used marble was in Italy, in the Temple of Jupiter in 146 BC. So they've been, our town at the moment is 100 AD, so they've been using it for a very long time, so they are pretty much pros at the marble. And they also used white limestone, and this was used for paving, doors, windows, frames and steps. So it's kind of a big block of stone that they could carve and use into bricks and stuff. They also invented the very early form of concrete as well, which was made out of concrete rubble. It was used as a filler at first, until they kind of found the properties when they mixed it with the lime mortar that you can get from the limestone, and that created a material that is basically what modern concrete is today. So they started using that to build more different structures out of, and also would set underwater, so that made it perfect for building bridges and all sorts of different things. They only used it for foundations, walls and vaults as well, which are indoor arches. And kind of some of those processes led to like creating different like new architectural features and stuff like that. And they also had dried sand bricks or fired bricks, depending on whatever you call them, basically. So they would be like red clay stone that they could carve, like they left out and either fired them or dried them naturally in the sun, and they would make bricks which they could carve and use for different buildings and different features. They're kind of about 59 centimeters squared, and they are also the type of brickwork that they would use for the roofing as well, and the drains. So they brought a lot of drainage system to Britain as well, because obviously they had roads that they would flood because of all the rain. And they also created domes out of these bricks, so you've got different curved roofs. And in one place they used different coloured bricks to actually create patterns within the ceiling themselves, using like yellow and orange to decorate it. And they also used stucco, which is for lining walls, so it can protect them. And this is a mix of sand, jasmonite and even marble dust as well. So as we are now making a beautiful Roman bath, so these were communal places that people come and sort of clean themselves, socialize, sort of have meetings, and also it was quite a religious sort of place as well. That different ones could be towards different gods that they believed in, especially like Minerva, who was one of the gods that the Roman baths in Bath were named after. And these baths were normally situated over a natural spring that they would find in the water, and this would mean that they could easily get water into the place. And the underground spring would be geothermically warmed while it was going through the ground, so it was kind of a natural hot spring for them to use. And it would be about 46 centigrade, the water, so it was nice and toasty. They would also, in the main hot pool would be the large pool in the middle, and then off on the rooms to the side they would have various different pools, hot pools, cold and hot rooms, fountains, even libraries. And one of the main features of it was the fact that they had underfloor heating, which was a new system that they invented, where they'd have stacks of bricks under the floor, and they would use big furnaces in one part of the building to vent the hot air through these layered brick stacks, so it would heat the floor, as you would be basically you wouldn't wear any clothes when you were in the Roman baths. You would basically just be walking around nude, and in Britain, especially in the winter time, that would probably be not the best idea. So underfloor heating was definitely a must. They also did have interior wall heating as well, which was used using a similar method, but putting a course through the walls. And the exteriors were normally quite plain, but the interiors were like really lavish, full of columns, marbles, statues, mosaics especially. So we've tried to add in some brightly coloured floor. We've got lots of pots and fountains, and using some of the items in the game to represent like hot rooms and different types of pools. There would be lots of lotions and places to store your clothes, so you kind of enter in through different rooms, all sorts of. Also had communal bathroom areas, so they would have all the toilets all lined up in one area for men and women, which we are making here, which I thought was quite funny. And they all sat around and sort of shared a little sponge on a stick to clean themselves, and read the newspaper and stuff. So we've got our own little version here to for when you enter in, you can kind of cleanse yourself as you go around into the different things, and making a little drainage system as well. And the temples and the baths and stuff sort of started off being a way to connect with the old Roman gods, and then as time went on, so over a few centuries till the 4th century, sort of Romans brought in Christianity as a religion, and this kind of got picked up by the people living in Britain as well, because obviously some of them would have been trading and stuff with the Romans. So kind of how that became a predominant religion here in Britain. But at this point the Celts were worshipping through druids and stuff like that, so there's a more pagan religion. And a feature of Roman baths is that they have domed roofs, so the air can get trapped in the top, and kind of went with some statues on the top, like the one in Bath itself, and sort of making it a very communal area with different things that people can go buy, with some little market stalls under the back here, and then at the front, sort of making it sort of a inviting, decorative area. And it was important for the Romans to have a lot of different communal areas, because obviously they were mainly sticking together and kind of kept the locals at bay, especially if they didn't get on with them, like the Scots, like I mentioned earlier. And Britain was actually divided into 5 different areas. So we have the bottom half of Britain all the way down to Cornwall across to Kent being one part, and the middle England from London up to below York was another area. Wales was an area, and then the north of England was kind of another area, with Scotland being the border where they couldn't fight against the Scots that lived up there. Most of the tribes that they call them tribes rather than like villages or settlements like we have been doing. So our little settlement hasn't really been disturbed by the Romans. It's still off. They're kind of progressing slowly. They might come and trade with this town now and again, but they kind of don't want to cause too much trouble because the Romans have also put up a lot of forts everywhere, so they're kind of controlling the English and putting in local kings to keep people sort of under control and taxed. Well, not taxed, but they might have had a few different things for them to use, like local stuff if they wanted to, and sort of keep control through a various important locations around the country, especially if there were bigger settlements there. They didn't want them to overthrow them until they decided to leave themselves, and it was quite important to keep their civilization going that they did this. So Romans built a lot of palaces as well, especially in important areas. So this one is actually based on Fishbourne Roman Palace, and this is in Chichester in South Sussex, and it is the largest Roman building to be discovered in Britain, and you can go around and visit it. One of its well-known things is that it has a lot of intact mosaics still, so the Romans loved using mosaics to decorate their floors. So in this part of the build I tried to use some mosaics that we have, and one of their famous ones is the Cupid on a dolphin mosaic, which is a fully intact mosaic that you can actually go see. A lot of this building kind of involves a lot of formal gardens, because gardens were a big feature for the Romans. If you had a house, you'd have a little wall garden at the back, which would have sort of exotic trees and plants and an outdoor eating area and a cooking area. So this has a formal garden with a complex box hedge row that kind of lines the path. They use a lot of gravel as well for the pathing areas. It was also one of the few places that had underfloor heating actually in the building itself, and the building itself actually was situated right on the water, as I have it here in The Sims, as the tide and the channel was a lot closer than it is now, because now it's much further inland than it actually was back then. So it was a crucial port. It actually started off as a military place as well, so different parts of the building built at different times and kind of turned into a living place a lot later, once they had actually established a bit more of a town and a port somewhere else. The owner of the house was a merchant who used the location to trade his goods and stuff around Europe and make it so he could afford to live there as well. And they prioritized eating outside as well, make sure the gardens were looking good. So in this build I've made a little sheltered area just here, so using some of the fences to make a little awning. They used to grow plants and stuff over the top to shade them from the sun, and they actually had like what we would call barbecues now. So they'd have a little oven, and they would have some chaiselongs, or they would build in sort of a seating area out of the stone, so they could all sit around and have their slaves or servants wait on them as they ate outside, especially as it was a lot warmer back in Britain then, so they could definitely eat out. I also put a lot of drapes and sort of linen and stuff about, just to represent some of the different types of fabrics and stuff they would have used to line their homes and sort of keep it nice and airy. Because obviously back in Italy they would have used them to keep the heat out and let some air flow through the house. A lot of the builds that I've done for this, I've put a lot of pots and stuff in, because they obviously liked showing off their wealth, and through the different mosaic flooring as well, you could show your real wealth and the more elaborately designed floors you had, the more money you clearly had to pay someone to lay down your designs and everything. And even though it doesn't look from the outside any different to the other buildings, it's obviously all about the inside, and the really great floor from Get Together worked perfectly for making a nice mosaic tired floor, even though it is the same design. They would have also brought over a lot of grapes, so this garden would have been lined with grapevines, so they could make their own wine, or pick them straight off the bushes as well, so they could eat them as they were. And it was obviously important to have a back entrance to the palace, so you could get your imports and exports out straight away, and obviously impress the people delivering your stuff to and from, so they could actually see your wealth there and then, instead of having to. So trade was very important for the Romans, because obviously they would have to ship over a lot of their building materials and the food that they were used to from the Mediterranean. So trade became more and more important, especially like port towns and places by the sea that they could easily get their goods into. So we have things like coins and pottery, olive oil from the Mediterranean, wine from the south of France, and we get shellfish, glass, even different types of metal like silver and gold, iron and copper, and oysters as well. So I kind of tried to make different little stalls here that represent all the different trades. So we've got a little potter, and we have a few other trades like an artist and a woodworker and a flower arranger as well. And we've got a little wine and alcohol little store, and there's obviously places for people to sit and meet, as the markets were kind of a big social sort of gathering area. So you would come and do business. You would also be situated near a temple as well, so the middle structure represents a little temple that you would go in and do your daily or weekly, however long worship. And it was kind of their temples look a lot like the Greek ones. So if you see any of these builds and think they look very Greek, then that is because it is very much based off that style. And we have a little woodworking place, and a lot of the objects that I've tried to use are in the debug menu as well. So if you want to find any of these items, then all you have to do is look in there. So each one, we've got a few more sort of fancier objects as well, some sort of proper crafted wooden furniture, and some actual metal and statues and proper paintings as well. And also added in some of the food stalls from the Salvadorian stuff, so you can get different various foods from different exotic locations. And obviously we needed a big fountain in the middle, as it's a nice big gathering space. So we are coming to the end of Roman Britain. They are leaving us to head back to warmer shores, and I'll leave you with a little building tour of the area, and I will see you for the next one.